He was known as the last of the mountain men. Buckskin Bill lived in Idaho's Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness for nearly 50 years, before it was even designated as protected wilderness. And over the decades, anyone who may have floated past his place along the 5-mile bar of the Salmon River would almost definitely be in for a great conversation with the man who would likely be wearing his trademark metal conquistador hat, or maybe the one with the horns on it. Buckskin Bill passed away 44 years ago today. He died the way he lived, alone, in the home he built with his own hands. Before a recluse living in Idaho's mountains, Buckskin Bill was certainly well known. Buckskin Bill got his first scent of celebrity status in the early 1960s when he was visited by True Adventure, the TV series.
In an age of 1,000 modern comforts and conveniences, one man has chosen to live alone on a mountain in the wildest section of the United States, with no conveniences except those he can make with his own hands.
They walked Bill through several scenes as he showed them where he lived.
Here by Idaho's Salmon River, the river of no return, lives Buckskin Billy.
Or Bill.
He's a legend.
Bill showed the camera crew how he survived 30 years alone so far.
Yes, 30 fantastic years he's lived in the Idaho primitive area. I think you'll be amazed and thrilled with his story.
His story began in 1906 in Oklahoma, when it was still Indian territory. Born Sylvan Ambrose Hart, he graduated from the University of Oklahoma and thought for a moment about getting into the oil business. Then the Depression hit.
My reaction to the Depression was to find a place with natural resources to defeat it. I could have found no better place than Salmon River.
He arrived in Idaho in 1932 after buying 50 acres of land along the Salmon River for $1. There, he would spend decades in solitude. But that didn't mean he didn't have his visitors.
He is a living, authentic mountain man, perhaps the last of a legendary kind.
And they usually brought along a camera.
The object of the trip is to meet a man remarkable in our time. A man who has lived in the canyon 40 years, alone. He is a master of the art of survival, of peaceful coexistence with nature. At 28, he came to the Salmon River, built a cabin, and prospected for gold. He has lived here ever since. A life of independence and resourcefulness, which has earned him the nickname Buckskin Bill.
Buckskin Bill claimed he spent only $50 a year buying supplies. The rest, he hunted, or grew, or made himself.
You were made this, is that right? Right from scratch?
Pocket knife, yeah, made all the parts.
And just because he lived alone, that didn't make Buckskin Bill a hermit. He actually seemed to enjoy visitors.
If there was kids along, he liked to ask them if they liked kittens and bring out a jar of cougar kittens that he had preserved.
But living alone was the life he chose.
I got the impression that most of them were uncomfortable with too close a neighbors, that they liked to have some choice of their neighbors and who they visited with, and were very personal about their time, so that you didn't want to infringe. If you infringe too much, you wouldn't be welcome.
Years later,
what is retirement? Why don't you want to retire?
KTVB's Sal Selesky would learn
What they do to you is this.
there wasn't much that could keep Buckskin Bill
Declare you an old man.
from living the life he wanted.
How would you like people to remember Buckskin Bill? In what fashion? What would you like done to all of the things that you have?
Well, what I told them was, I wanted to be in the museum surrounded with some of my equipment. And I wanted to have...
Wait a minute, you want to be in a museum? How?
Well, I wanted to be stuffed like a elk or something like that, and I wanted a 6-shooter in each hand and a bowie teeth in my bowie knife in my teeth, and that would be prepared. And then they'd get my feelings all just at a glance.
It wasn't long after that interview, on April 29th, 1980, Buckskin Bill passed away at his cabin at the age of 73. No, he wouldn't be stuffed and stood in a museum, but buried in his own garden.
It's a place where everything's in your favor. If you really know anything, why, it's the best place of all to live.
Of course, Buckskin Bill probably wasn't the last of the mountain men. I mean, that title may fall to Dugout Dick, who we've done a couple of stories with over the years. None of any other of those Idaho mountain men, though, were covered by Sports Illustrated in 1966 and had their own National Geographic TV special. He did have time to write about his own life, including his jobs as a guide and a Forest Service fire lookout while he lived in along the Salmon River. He also wrote about his fight with the IRS over that income he received. It was later published as a book in 2003, Last of the Mountain Men, the true story of an Idaho solitary. Buckskin Bill's wish of being in a museum did kind of come true. They turned his cabin into a museum, providing a glimpse into his legendary life. It can only be accessed with a trip down the Salmon River, though. So if you can't get there, well, you can still see some of Buckskin Bill's stuff at the Idaho State Museum.